loud. All right. Thank you, Howie. Thank you. Thank you. Hello there, friends and colleagues. So I hope everything goes off a little bit more smoothly than we tried to start this program today. Welcome to Conversations with the Curator. Sorry, I'm still trying to figure out where to look at.
I just try to look at you.
This is a monthly behind the scenes look into our collections and our exhibits and our curiosities, most especially. If you have ever wondered how an exhibit comes together or what goes on behind the scenes at your favorite museum, hint, it's a lot of nerdery, you're in the right place. My name is Sarah White. I am the Community Engagement Coordinator here at NCHGS, and I am joined by my colleague, Tim Betts, our Curator of Exhibitions. Today, we are taking a deep dive into a real treasure, quite frankly, in our collection. The Civil War letters of two brothers, James and Philip Connelly. The brothers were 20 and 17 years old, respectively, in order, when they enlisted in the 142nd Pennsylvania Infantry Volunteer Regiment. I did that right. They fought together at Fredericksburg, at Chancellorsville, and at Gettysburg, while yearning for home at their little settlement at Martin's Creek. So, Tim, I know you have a few slides you want to go through.
I do.
Yes.
If I can figure out how to do that. There, I think I did that. Did that look like that worked?
Easy peasy.
Easy peasy.
Easy peasy,
okay.
Lemon squeezy.
Yeah, I figured what I can do first is kind of talk about what these letters are, what they comprise of, who's writing them, who they're writing to, and then we can kind of do like the context stuff, the things they talk about, kind of all of that. So you had mentioned, Sarah, general nerdery. We're about to kind of get into that.
Hear us now.
Hear us. So the Connelly letters are really 28 letters.
28.
28. So that comprises 3, let's say, like drops of letters, collections of letters. So that would be, there is a 2011 donation of 10 letters to us from a man named Dwayne Sweet. So we acquired those in 2011. The story that is attached to those, and it's kind of in the records for them, is that they were purchased for him by his wife at a yard sale for $8, which is great treasure. We then acquired 6 more letters that we purchased at auction in 2022. Then, so in our collection right now, upstairs in a box, is 16 Connelly letters. There then is an additional 12 letters, and those letters are in Bangor. They're at the Hunter Martin Settlement Museum. And those, I mean, that is where they're more or less from, right? So really we're thinking of 28 letters. They represent one side of a 2-year-long conversation. That's what they look like. And what I'm showing you here is the front and the back, the recto and the verso, as we nerds would say, of one side of one of those letters, and then the other side. They then are also in an envelope, like there's an envelope associated with them. What's actually really cool, and it's something I didn't go down the rabbit hole with here, though I could have, though we have been known to go over time. So all of those letters, well, the envelopes themselves are postmarked, right? Or they are marked in a way, sometimes they're being sent and the postage is due, which is the case with this letter here. The Connelly brothers, for much of the time they're writing, talk about how they don't have money. So they're really kind of borrowing and sending letters like that. They're postmarked, so you can kind of figure out how long it takes for like letters to get from like Virginia to Martin's Creek and kind of all that. So it's really, that's a really fascinating element to this.
And these are in great shape.
They're in great shape. They're really great shape. So they are written between, or at least the letters we have, because there's probably others, though the letters we have do kind of form at least a chain of letters that makes sense as half of a conversation, let's say. But the letters that we have or have access to are between April 1862 and July 1863. The people involved there are James D. Connelly. So he is born in 1842 and he dies in 1863. So James Connelly will die on the first day of the Battle of Gettysburg. He will die on July the 1st, 1863. His brother Philip is also serving with him. He is 4 years younger. He will live till 1938, and he's actually someone I'm kind of fascinated with here. We can come back to him in a little bit. They are both serving in Pennsylvania 142nd Regiment of Volunteers, Pennsylvania Infantry, and they are both in Company G. The majority of these letters, well, the letters themselves, are written to really the people kind of listed below here. They are written to either or John and Maria Connelly. Those are their parents living at home in Martins Creek. Or they are written to either of their sisters, Harriet or Miriam. Harriet is married to Josiah Heckman, who is also serving in the Pennsylvania 142nd Regiment of Volunteers, PA Infantry. I feel like now I'm doing one of those, like, explaining like a very complicated thing, but I hope I'm distilling it.
That was many dates and names you said.
Many dates and names. Well, just you wait, because there's charts, Sarah.
And
there is charts that are color coordinated. So this is a chart that is who the letters are sent to. There is 13. This is the letters sent from both of the Connelly brothers. 13 of those letters are sent to their mother, Maria Connelly. 4 of them are sent to their father. The majority of the letters to the father are either about troop movements or about ensuring that the father receives money owed to him because of his sons being in them, sending him pay or that sort of thing. 9 of the letters are to both parents. So it'll be like to dear mother, dear father, dear parents. 3 of the letters are to the sisters, and here I put Harriet and Miriam together. So 3 of the letters are to some denomination of Harriet and Miriam.
Just them.
Okay. Individuals. Yeah. 24 of the letters are written by James Connelly. So the majority of this collection of writing is James Connelly. Really kind of starting in April and then ending really kind of, ending right before he dies. The last letter is right before the Battle of Gettysburg. And then 4 of those letters are written by Philip Connelly, including a letter that Philip Connelly will send on July the 8th, 1863, informing his parents that their son and his brother died at Gettysburg. So that is the kind of breadth of those letters, let's say. Then I pulled out kind of what this looks like, just to kind of give.
Did Tim go a little over the top again?
Tim researched this. Tim is not necessarily like a big Civil War guy. Like Tim thinks that's interesting as he talks in the third person, but the Connelly letters are fascinating, like as a historical document, right? Because they are they're exceptionally, and we'll kind of get to them, they're exceptionally personal. And of course they are, because they're letters that they're writing back to their family. Right. So what we can do, and really what I'm doing here, is tracking where the 142nd is. Because, you can do that, right? Like Frederick, Maryland, Falmouth, Virginia, Fredericksburg, and they're writing, this gets them to the end of 1862, but this is James writing to both parents kind of all of the time. some of these letters I've kind of pulled out to talk about a little bit more. So just kind of some highlights here, I suppose. The October 14, 1862 letter is really interesting. There is to his mother, there is an extended discussion of cooking and kind of what cooking looks like. And then there is an extended discussion because the letter is written in pokeberry ink. More on that in a little bit. In November, Philip is injured and Philip is sent to a hospital in Washington, D.C. He will then write letters from there. The majority of the Philip letters are while he is in the hospital. He is, my favorite of these is a letter in December and then kind of subsequent fixation on this, where J.D. Connelly gives an extended plea for his mother, his parents, but really I think it's to his mother, to send him a box of eatables from home because the food is bad. The cooking he talks about in that October letter and in the November letter talks about how they are essentially cooking and mixing whatever meager food they have with dirt to have something to sustain themselves. But he writes about how he wants this box, and then he gives like a very extended description of how to send the box and like what to write on the box and what to put in the box. And then into 1863, that'll continue. Like he's going to keep asking about the status of said box. In fact, like I have, if the letter exists, it's not one we have. There's not a letter of James Connelly acknowledging he receives his box of eatables. So that's sad. He, in the beginning of January 1863, he's writing to his mother, and he does something I think we all do, which is writing the letter, and instead of writing 1863, he writes 1862 and then crosses 1862 out and writes 1863. Who among us has not done such a thing? Philip writes to his mother in the beginning of January from the hospital in Washington. James inquires about the status of the eatables box to his sister in January of that year as well. Breaks teeth on hardtack. That's what I'm going to pull out later and talk about. Into January and February, James Connelly is sick from the Mud March, where they are marching up, in exceptionally hard weather. He is sick and has a sore throat, and as he calls it, like pain in the teeth, which sounds horrible. He will then get better from that. Into March, he is talking about Vicksburg, which is the beginning of Grant's operations in Vicksburg from March into July of 1863. In March, there's talk about Philip trying to get discharged. So Philip will eventually rejoin the 142nd because he's at Gettysburg. April, James loans money to the lieutenant who needs money, which is interesting because James seems to not have any money. And kind of a recurrent trend here is how people aren't being paid. Like there's a pay owed. But then he also sends money home to pay for shoes that he purchased before he left. So that happens. May is kind of an extended discussion of the Battle of Chancellorsville, more news of Vicksburg, moving into Pennsylvania, of course, towards the end of June 27th, 1863, which is the beginning of the beginnings of what will become the Gettysburg campaign. Battle of Gettysburg, July 1 through 3. James' last letter to his parents is June the 27th, 1863, which they almost assuredly did not receive before their son dies on July 1st. So Philip writes on July the 8th that James has died, and it's a very kind of lengthy letter where he talks about like divine deliverance and the will of God and kind of all of these things.
The good death.
Yeah, definitely the good death. There's definitely element of that happening. And then that's the kind of end of the body of the letters, shall we say.
So Philip sends the last letter July 8th. Do we know when they receive it?
I'm not sure of that. No, we don't quite know.
That'd be a fascinating little.
I think there's definitely a lag
Mhm.
time for that,
Mhm.
for sure. I
Given
mean,
There's a war happening.
yeah, and I mean, look at the kind of timing on that, right? Like, let's say they get it,
Yeah.
say they get it like on the 12th, probably, right?
Mhm.
12th, 13th, 14th.
Mhm.
I mean, when Philip writes, James has been dead for 8 days,
Yeah.
right? So. But yeah, so that is
Ooh.
that is like what the letters are in like a kind of
Don't you dare say little snippet.
big dump of letters. Yeah. And this, like I said, this is really what is now 2 primary collections of letters, right? The
Mhm.
letters we have,
Mhm.
and then the letters that are up in Bangor,
Mhm.
right, at Hunter Mark.
So I like to think about the journeys that people go on and what their experiences are like. What would it, I mean, it's not hard to imagine, but what would it have felt like going from this little sleepy settlement of Martin's Creek that had a population of what, 20?
Wait, small, yeah.
Yeah, small, out to fighting in major battles of the Civil War? What would that experience have looked like?
I've been wondering about
them?
that kind of as I've gone through them, right? Because it is, there's a moment where I believe it's in one of the Philip letters, and I could be wrong here. There's a moment where they talk about like Lincoln visiting, right? Like, so there is kind of this like element of them talking about like the larger world, right? And kind of like being part of it and kind of all of these things. I think it must have been, like it's hard to know. And they don't necessarily, I'd say the most introspective of the letters is Philip's letter back after his brother dies. So they don't necessarily do a lot of saying how they feel. Really kind of what they'll be doing is saying like, oh, I'm in good spirits. There is one moment where they say like things have been bad. James Connelly says like things have been bad the last several days. That's before he gets the sore throat. But I imagine it must have been overwhelming, right? Because they are at these large events, right? And I think it's that kind of thing we've talked about here. There's a lot of recurring themes we're starting to have with these conversations, right? But I think part of it is this idea, right, that they are living through a massive historical event, and in fact, taking part in a massive historical event. But I think it's that reality of it, that when you're doing that, you have a sense that you are like you're living through, like how could you not go through like the Battle of Gettysburg and not have an inkling that it's a significant
This is
moment,
going to change
a
things.
significant moment in American history, right? But like I think it's also this like hard to know when you're in it, right? That sort of thing. So I imagine though, like there's this great moment, and it's actually here on the slide I have up in like June of in May into June, where they're talking. Well, James is talking about as they're heading up from the south into Pennsylvania up to Gettysburg. He starts doing this discussion, and I imagine it is at the behest of his father, because it's the elements of this discussion are addressed to his father, where he starts talking about like, this is what the weather is like, this is what the crops are like, this is what the land is like. And I mean, like the father's a farmer, right? And it's like a rural farming community, so that makes sense. But there is this like comparison of like where I am to home. And of course, this constant like, what's going on at home? I heard this news at home. Confirm that, right? So there's kind of really interesting, they're definitely like talking about where they are in relation to where they came from, right? But I think, yeah, so I feel like I'm kind of longly answering the question, right? Like, I think it was one of those things that might be hard to know unless you're kind of living through. Right. And it might not even be something they thought about as it was happening.
Right. I mean, you're just trying to make it through every day alive.
Yeah. Which is hard, actually.
Yeah. So this isn't much of a tangent, but doing some research for the this season's Erie Easton, I'm talking about the Ludlow doctors, which it was just the father, the son was still too young, I think, who served at Gettysburg, he volunteered. And some of the things that he, at one point, he argued with his commander about, if I remember right, like the commander said, you don't need to dig trenches around the camp. And he was like, no, you do. That's actually how you stave off malaria if you have proper drainage. And the guy was like, that's a waste of my soldiers' time.
Right.
So it's so, like, when I'm thinking about these two young men, I don't want to say boys, but young men, you know, they grew up in the middle of nowhere. They have no resistance to childhood diseases, have probably never been farther than maybe Easton.
I mean, they enlist in Stroudsburg, so I think they're up that way a lot. Yeah, so like maybe the other way, but yeah.
But thinking about all the things, like just if we don't even consider them being in a battle, just the emotional and psychological changes that they went through.
Absolutely.
And then your immune system tanks because you're so stressed.
We're actually just talking about this like in the library upstairs this morning, because it's like I mean, like, this is true of so much of American history, right? Like these guys are going and they're going to come back to a society that is not going to support them really, right? And by that I mean like mentally and emotionally support them. Because I think like living through this would be horrific. Reading about it, it's like this is horrible, right? Like the conditions that they're living in, not to mention like the carnage they would have seen, which would have been horrific.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and not only are these letters in fantastic condition, but they're things that like we could safely wash our hands and touch them, and we're confident that they're not going to fall apart.
Right.
And part of what makes our job so fascinating is that we get to do that on a daily basis with letters, with other objects.
Yeah.
And I know in a few of our discussions, but on and off programming, you talk about the aura of an object. And don't look at me like that.
I know.
Not in like the metaphysical sense of it having some kind of otherworldly material about it, but in like the layman's terms, when we look at the artifact itself in person, it makes the past present.
Right.
How do these letters do that?
They do it because they're there, right? They're real and they're happening in real time, right? Because they're letters, right? So like when I think of not to go into a long discussion of the aura, no one wants me to do that. The aura is the thing that makes museums magical, right? And I don't mean magical, I mean magical in the sense of why museum can be special, right? Like last week I gave a tour to a group of younger high school kids, right? And they were really here to see the Treaty of Easton, right on the other side of this wall here, right? And I was showing it to them and talking about the Treaty of Easton and kind of trying to complicate it a bit. And, I was there and I was kind of like in the moment talking, and who knows what I was saying, but I know I was talking about it. But someone said like, oh, that's the real one. And I was like, yes, that's it. That's it there. This is that's the thing. That's the real thing. Yeah. So the aura is that, right? That is the real thing. That is the real Treaty of Easton. These are the real letters. This was at this place while these people were there. This is the object that existed at a time in history and then continues to the present, right? The aura is that, right? And what the aura, like, if we're to think of like the Connelly letters in terms of that, right? Like, they are these things that are being written, and they are being written at a very specific time
Mhm.
and in a very specific place. That might be my pokeberry time. So there is a letter in November 27, 1862, where James writes his mother. This is, of course, the transcription of it. He talks about the food. So I did mention, and this kind of gives you an idea of it. This is preserving James's spelling, which is idiosyncratic,
Yeah.
but James's handwriting is beautiful. Spelling is not necessarily standardized. So when he talks about the food, so food first, the food that we have is not the best. We can make out by eating half dirt to mix. It makes a good mess. We stick a stick to a plate and make a pan to fry our meat. It is troublesome. So they're talking about, like, you know, how the troublesome ways in which they would do that work, right? But what I'm really into, like historic process nerd me, I have got so poor that I had to make pokeberry ink to write, as I could not write back. I think since you have sent me this money, I can get some better ink. I don't know whether you can see the letter or no. It fades so that it gets at hand. You cannot read it. Pokeberry is everywhere. If you, I mean, pokeberry is a frequent flyer in my yard at home.
Yes.
Pokeberry is, we tend to call it a weed and pull it out, right? But pokeberry, you can make the berries, you shouldn't eat them really, I don't think, but you can make ink out of them. They make a really nice, I pulled that kind of image there, a nice magenta ink. And of course, like any ink is really just like something that makes a pigment and water, and you boil it and then you can write with it, right? I think that's really cool, right? But that is also speaking of this moment of that's the aura, right? Because he's writing it, he's talking about how poor he is. He talks about the thing he uses to write it with, and you're holding it and you can see like, oh, this is like ink that is that, right? So like this is a piece of paper and this is ink that is there, while James Connelly is struggling to cook with a stick attached to a plate and mixing dirt with it, right? Which
it's killing me where he says, I wish that you could see some of it. I think you would laugh.
I know. That's
if
really
you
good.
are laughing about it.
I
like,
know.
That's it. That's the as I'm losing my voice. That's the tangible.
That's the tangible thing, because like, yeah, I mean, like this element of the letter's funny, right? But it is also this element of like,
oh no, this is terrible.
It's how terrible it is, because like these guys are signing up to like keep the Union preserved, right? And they are mixing dirt with whatever provisions they have and cooking in a makeshift frying pan, right? Like that is astonishing when you think about it. And of course it's true, right? It's like the army is under, you know, undersupplied and all these things, but like it can do both of those things, right? And I think like James Connelly probably would agree, right? But
it's also a very human thing probably to say, oh look, we're having such this rough time of it, but don't worry, mother, I think you'd laugh about it.
I think you laugh about it. Yeah, because he's always like, oh yeah, we did this, and like we climbed through all of this mud, and the mud was knee deep, etc. and so forth, but we're fine. Everything's okay. Don't worry about it. Right. So there is this element of like I'm not sure if it's like convincing your mother everything's fine, or an element of like machismo, or a little bit of both. And it could be that, right? Because he is like a 20-year-old dude, right? So I think there is kind of a little bit of all these things happening. But what I love about them, and I think what this letter does, because this is the aura, right? Like a thing made at a time and the place, and it's there. And there's, but it is also that they are so human, right? They are just so, because you read them and it's like, yeah, it's really, he's talking about things you kind of expect. And like if you do the whole like letter trove we have, you like kind of have fallen in love with James Connelly a little bit, right? Because he really becomes this kind of real person. He is that whole episode where he's like telling his mother how to pack the box and send it to him, and then like the continued like wheedling about that, right? He becomes very, you figure him out as a person, really, and then you realize that he doesn't make it, right? So it's like there really is like a gut punch kind of at the end of that.
So. Sorry, not to dramatic pause.
I was gonna say.
This is a real dramatic pause. There's a lot of words in my brain right now. So much of what we do here is to educate visitors, school groups, other tour groups, that so much of what we study is relevant
Mhm.
because it's still happening.
Of
Because
course.
it's things that we can still feel.
Right.
Like the student who was like, oh, that's the real treaty, like,
It's the real one.
yes,
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 it is. Yes.
yeah, and
Yeah.
it's old and it's fragile, and that's how we got the state of New Jersey. Like, that has some real
It's a
implications
real thing there. Yeah.
that are still felt today.
Yeah.
So we think of, like, thinking of the high school students in particular, right? They get this idea of history when they're in school, that history is something that happens in the great marble halls of these old men in white powdered wigs making important decisions with a lot of fanfare.
Yeah.
Um,
And that's maybe like 10% of it.
oh, yes.
Yeah.
But these letters are such a perfect example of how the other 90% of history is made.
Exactly.
Right, at the kitchen table,
Yeah,
in the shop.
regular people, right? Like,
Yes,
they're
everyday things.
they're certainly not rich, right? Like,
No,
they're regular
the
people.
guy can't
writing-
afford ink.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think it's the thing I think, like, so that thing, the regular people at the kitchen table thing, right? Because I think there is an element to that, right?
Mhm.
But I think what's really, or what the Connelly letters reminded me of, or
Mhm.
reminded me that it's like good to say, right?
Mm.
Is that, I think a lot of times students, regular people might find history boring because you know the end.
Mm.
And but of course, not the end of history, because like it's gonna keep going.
Right,
But like, you know what happens in the Civil War, like, you know how the Civil War ends. But what's really interesting about the Connelly letters, and I think what's really important for those of us that are historians that talk about history, or even those of us that like are interested in it, like, more than half of
Mhm.
James's letters
Mhm.
in 1862 and early 1863
Mhm.
are talking about how the war is going to be over soon.
Oh,
Like, assuredly, we here at camp have heard that the war is going to be over soon,
Oh, no.
right? Like, what is really great about that, right? Not great for them,
right.
is that the war is going to go on. They're nowhere near, like in 1863, they're nowhere, like early
Oh, no.
1863, they're nowhere near the end of the war.
Uh-uh.
Gettysburg, of course, is this like, turning point,
Right,
but
right.
they're nowhere near the end.
But you don't know that.
They don't know
when you're in
that,
it. Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And that's the kind of reality of history, right? Because it's like James and Philip don't know that the
Mhm.
war is going to go on till
Mm.
1865
Mhm.
and will like ultimately end, and then a couple of days later, the president will be shot, right? Like,
Mm.
they don't know that it's going to be a much longer slog of time. And that is true of anyone at any time in history, right? Unless
Right.
you're some sort of oracle, which doesn't really happen. You don't know what's gonna happen, right? And I think like that's an element of it. So like there's this element of like the humanness of like James Connelly and the things they're talking about, and this kind of whole experience of their lives. But there's also just an element of uncertainty and like element of hope
Mhm.
that the war is going to be over, but they don't know the end. They
Right.
don't know what's gonna happen tomorrow. They don't know what's gonna happen at the end of the day,
Right.
And it's like, as you're reading them, it's like, oh, like, you're either telling them at home, like, oh, it's gonna be over soon, and we're all gonna be home soon.
Right.
And like, maybe you don't think that's the case, or you do actually think that's the case. There's a whole real collection of reasons he could have thought that,
Mhm.
right? But there is this important element, which is that as you're living through anything in your life, you don't know what's the next thing.
Right.
And I think that's exciting, right? So it's like, that's a important thing that I think kind of is invigorating about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, like, I'm reading a book now on the code breakers in World War II
Mhm.
in Britain.
Yeah.
And all of them were like, right as Pearl Harbor happened, they were like, oh, America's entered the war, it'll be over soon, and that was 1941.
No, it's gonna be longer.
Oh, no,
Yeah.
it's gonna be more terrible.
Yeah.
But at the same time, could you continue to get up and do what you do without that hope that it's gotta be over soon?
Right.
Right,
Yeah.
it's gotta stop,
Yeah.
and then just think of like the adrenaline getting you through
Do that.
day to day. Nope,
Yep.
nope.
Don't.
Yeah. Fascinating in a horrifying and yet very humanizing way, which is just the study of history in general.
Absolutely.
Horrifyingly fascinating, but also relevant.
Right.
So this is what we do, folks. This is our job.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
It really is. And so then it's like, where does the story go? Right. So James dies at Gettysburg on July 1, 1863. I haven't found where he's buried.
Oh,
He's not listed in the cemetery.
oh,
He could be, I mean, that there's a wide array of reasons that is, right? He could have been unidentified or unidentifiable. When the Civil War is happening, that is the beginnings of embalming, right?
oh, yeah,
The
yeah.
beginnings of the preservation of bodies. That's really going to take off with Lincoln. Well, not like with Lincoln selling ads about it, but like it's really going to take off with after the Lincoln assassination when Lincoln's embalmed and taken on the train. But that's used to bring soldiers home. And I have doubt that the Connollys paid for that, right? I mean, of course they could have.
Didn't Philip say that he couldn't
get back, he couldn't get to the battlefield, he couldn't get to him, yeah. So there's that element of it. The person I'm super interested in and kind of want to know more about is Philip. So Philip is his younger brother. Philip lives till 1938. And I kind of, this is interesting though, because Philip, by the end of 1863, will desert. So he's going to desert. Then when he does that, though, Philip is in the PA 142nd. Kind of throughout that, he's going to drop from record. He's not on the Pennsylvania monument. Right, sort of thing like that. Right. So, but I am very interested in Philip as a person. He moves back home. So he deserts and he moves back to Lower Mount Bethel. In the 1910 census, he's listed as a carpenter, kind of doing odd jobs. He is married and his wife dies in 1900. So he is a widower for the last 38 years of his life, right? So I find him very interesting, right? Because he kind of had been, from the letters, he is the quiet one, right? Because there is just like the 4 letters from him that we have. And the thing, like, I wonder, right, like, is it that Philip didn't write? Or is it that James, they both wrote, James died, and they were carefuler to preserve James's? Right. So that is a question I have. Because the thing about this whole collection, like as a historian, that I think is really interesting, also frustrating, is that what we have is half of the phone conversation, right? Because we don't have, and they probably don't exist anymore, the letters from Martin's Creek to them, right? Because we only have like those letters out, and they are there's a lot of detail in them, right? There's a lot of kind of information about like what their lives were like, and there's even from the letters you can kind of glean what the letter they're answering was about. But yeah, we're kind of missing a large chunk of the story here.
Right. It's a very bad game of telephone.
Very bad game of telephone.
You'd think I'd be used to traumatizing topics by now.
No, we seem to keep doing it, yeah.
Well, on that note, next conversation with the curator will be also alarmingly relevant. That will be August the 28th, Wednesday, August 28th at noon. And we'll be talking about a preview of the upcoming exhibit.
I was gonna say, I think that's what it is, isn't it?
Warehouse Valley, a changing landscape. The most politically correct way you could have possibly have said that.
It's an exhibit about the landscape and the way it changes.
Okay, you're not wrong. You're not wrong. What will that look like? And how does that bring the history? Okay, it's our only pun of the day. How does that bring history home?
Oh, wow. Okay, so
tonight?
what Warehouse Valley is going to be, and it's becoming more tangible every day,
Yay.
is historic images of the Lehigh Valley, a wide variety of them paintings. And we had a photographer go out and photograph the same place or a place pretty close to it today. So those are going to be displayed together. And it's really about, like it has the title Warehouse Valley, and it's of course that, but like as an organization, one of our missions is to foster community dialogue, right?
Yes.
And I think if you're living in the Valley or you know someone from the Valley, there is very little, everyone, and a large element of community dialogue is the changing landscape, right? And it's been really fascinating, because the thing about it is the landscape we live in it. A thing I've been thinking a lot, and that's kind of in the first draft of my introduction to this exhibit. Looks like, look at this, and like, this probably might not even make it to the actual one, is landscapes of memory, right? They do, right?
You gotta.
Yeah, the roads we travel, the towns we live in, the infrastructure we have is history, right? And that impacts the world we live in now. So more on Warehouse Valley next month, but it's been fun.
Yeah. I mean, you throw a stone out the door and you ask somebody what their opinion is on the warehouses, and you're standing there talking for 15 minutes.
Yeah. What I'm hoping though, and we'll talk about this next month, is that this is really kind of a larger nuanced conversation, right? Because the warehouses are part of it, but it's warehouses bring jobs, warehouses bring development, warehouses bring the convenience of ordering something and getting it the next day, or maybe even the same day. Ultimately, like this landscape in the Valley has been changing since people have been in it, right?
Yeah.
Trains and the steel and industry and the cement, right? Like, so
I'm sure somebody, in the 1880s was like, God dang, that silk mill, there used to be a farm there.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's like what my hope of Warehouse Valley and kind of what we'll talk about next month is that this is contextualizing the current Valley in a longer history.
Right. Fantastic. And we're having the same conversations I'm sure they would have had then too. The people that move here for jobs.
Astoundingly, the same conversations have been happening for hundreds of years.
Weird.
Almost, yeah.
Wild.
Yep.
Wild. It's almost like there's a whole field to study
Almost.
on that idea.
Almost.
Whoa. All right. So do we have any questions from our participants before we sign off for the afternoon? Any questions about James or Philip that we can answer? Any questions about the aura in museums?
Don't ask that. Many hours will happen.
No one has any questions. I had so many. Alrighty then. As a reminder, again, please send out the Zoom link to anyone you know that would like to tune in. This is free. You do not need to register beforehand. And we will see you all on August 28th. I'm going to double check. Wednesday, August 28th at noon for a conversation about the changing landscape of the Lehigh Valley. And we will see you all then.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Tim.